we're going to do is repeal and replace Obamacare.
Immediately replacing and repealing Obamacare.
I never said repeal it and replace it within 64 days. I have a long time.
President Trump today, after the bill was pulled off, not voted on, and essentially they're moving on. The president saying in the Oval Office today, it's time to go on to the next thing.
We'll probably be going right now for tax reform, which we could have done earlier, but this really would have worked out better if we could have had some Democrat support. Remember this, we had no Democrat support, so now we're going to go for tax reform, which I've always liked.
We're back with our panel. Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com. Kristen Soltis-Anderson, columnist for the Washington Examiner. Leslie Marshall, syndicated talk radio host and syndicated columnist. Charles Krauthammer. Guy, one of the reasons I was told that they wanted to do the health care first was, one, because they had promised it all along, but two, because of deficit savings that they were planning. They had it over $300 billion at one point. It was about $150 at the end of the negotiations, so that they could get to the numbers they wanted on tax reform. They could take out the Obamacare taxes that people were paying and be able to use the difference to get the numbers down, the percentages down for tax reform. Now they have to find that somewhere else.
Yep. So the baseline was going to be more favorable for tax reform in a post-Obamacare environment, which is now not going to be a reality. And so it's like, well, let's pick up and move on to the next thing. It's not going to be easy. People are forgetting already Republicans are at each other's throats on tax reform. There's a huge disagreement between the House and the Senate on the border adjustment tax. The president's not exactly clear where he is on that issue. And now that there's $1 trillion, up to $1 trillion of a baseline problem for Republicans, that challenge gets even harder. So the Obamacare piece blowing up on the tracks might also significantly impact this next piece, which is why they were trying to do it in the sequence that they at least attempted to.
Charles.
Well, there's one thing they've learned from this health care bill. When you come to a really difficult issue, and there were several in the health care that doomed it, the really hard one in tax reform is the border tax. There is a real split among Republicans, a philosophical one. They're going to have to work it out in advance. You can't wait for the last minute. It could end up with another train wreck. I think there's tremendous unanimity among Republicans and conservatives on the basic outlines of tax reform. They're really ready to go. But unless they work out some kind of compromise agreement, substitute on the border tax, which is essentially a tax on imports that favors exports, which means a lot of winners and a lot of losers and a lot of lobbying, that they ought not to venture into this. So they got to do their stuff before, not like the perils of Pauline at the last minute as they did on health care.
Remember, Leslie, you have 11 Senate Democrats up for re-election in states where Donald Trump won 82% or more of the counties in those states. So going into it, you would think that those states particularly are vulnerable for maybe some leverage on big things. It didn't happen on Obamacare. You weren't going to move Democrats over on that repeal and replace. Could it happen on tax reform?
The problem is, and I agree with Guy and Charles to a degree on this, which is you still have infighting with tax reform. If you reduce the corporate tax rate to 15%, what happens to the budget deficit? Rand Paul is not in lockstep with Paul Ryan on this. And then some people say, well, how progressive is it to go back to something that, in a sense, Reagan originally proposed back in the day? You talked about imports and taxes on that. Democrats want tax reform. Republicans want tax reform. The problem here is you have a split among both Democrats and Republicans as to how much and where do you cut or just entirely omit. And I think we're going to see something similar with tax reform that we're seeing with health care, unfortunately, because we have two divided parties. But today I think that we're seeing more of a fractured GOP.
Kristen.
Well, you'd like to think that when folks are coming together to talk about something like tax reform, it's everybody coming to the table and everybody putting their ideas forward and feeling listened to, and you come to something that everyone agrees on. But in reality, a lot of times when these deals get made, it's because folks feel like there are consequences for not going along with something that they might not love. And with this health care bill, I don't think there's a sense that there were going to be any consequences for folks who said no. That clip we saw earlier in the program of Nancy Pelosi jubilant about this result, there's nobody that was going to vote no on this who's going to have have an ad run in their district saying, your no vote was responsible for Nancy Pelosi being happy. So at this point, when it comes to other things, are there enough sticks to keep people in line to get consensus?
That's a great point. I mean, you're not going to get to the right of Mark Meadows in his district in North Carolina. You're just not.
Yeah, and then the other piece of this is Obamacare repeal and replace really gone? Is this not happening anymore? This is 7 years of promises.
Right. So to that point, Jim Jordan, who was a member of the House Freedom Caucus, puts out a statement. The American Health Care Act did not have the support it needed, neither in Congress nor among the American people. Now House Republicans owe it to our constituents to immediately get back to the drawing board and bring forward a bolder effort to replace the failing Obamacare with a plan to reduce costs by increasing choice and competition. I look forward to working with my Republican colleagues to accomplish this goal. Is that happening? Do we have any sense that that's going to happen?
I mean, maybe, but it's like, okay, step 1, start over. Great. Step 3, repeal and replace. Step 2, shrug emoji. Like, what is going to fill that void? We just went through this. All the same dynamics are going to apply all over again. I hope something happens. It needs to happen. There are good ideas on the table, but it's a real struggle, as we just learned.
Charles, this is why people hate Washington. It really is. Here is Hillary Clinton's tweet. Today was a victory for all Americans. You know, one side is saying, yay, they lost. The other side is saying, we're going to move on. But there's still this problem that we know is looming, right?
Look, I think there's sort of wisdom in what the president has said. At some point, when Obamacare really falls apart, when the premiums explode, which is going to happen, when so many insurers are pulled out, there are going to be counties, states where there'll be no insurers. They're going to have to do something. At that point, you can actually appeal to Democrats and say, you've got to help bail the country out. Otherwise, you're being unpatriotic. I think the Democrats would have to do something. But I think for conservatives to get together with Republicans, it is not that hard. Forget about reconciliation. Put in the bill phase 1 and phase 3 together. That will get the Freedom Caucus on board instantly. It has a lot of appeal, trading across straight lines. Tort reform. We've been waiting 50 years for tort reform.
So put it all in one bill.
Put it in
the
one
House.
bill.
Pass it out of the House. But how do you get to 60 votes in the Senate?
Well, then the Democrats are going to have to think, do you want to kill this? I think it would have a lot of popularity. There are people out there who've suffered from tort reform. There are doctors who are quitting because there's no tort reform. It's just one item in this. It's a very important one. It costs about $500 billion a year. We have the most expensive system in the world, 17% of GDP. Switzerland, I think, is the next with about 10. The gap is huge, and our medicine is the best in the world, but it's not twice as good. I mean, there are places to do this, and this would do it. Let the Democrats be the one who bring it down. We will actually have a national debate on these items, and I think the conservative side would win.
It would be interesting. A busy week here in Washington. Winners and losers. We're back with the panel. Guy.
The winner is Neil Gorsuch. He was exemplary. He was unscathed. He will be confirmed, and the only question is how much damage the Democrats will do to themselves trying to stop him. The loser is the alliance between the president and the House Speaker. All of their cajoling and pressure and efforts on this big issue did fail, and now the sniping has begun.
But related to that, my loser this week is tax reformers. This would have been a tax reform bill and would have set the stage for the bigger tax reform package later on. But the winner, I think, is former Speaker John Boehner, who I expect is glad that he was not in Washington this week, maybe watching this program with a glass of wine right now.
Maybe, or margarita. All right.
I think winner, sorry, I'm not quoting Hillary here, the American people, more than 50% say fix what we have. More than 50% said like Obamacare better than Trump care. Loser, I would say law enforcement that did not send out Amber Alerts. We've had 17 women, young girls, Latinos and African Americans predominantly, who've been missing since February. 9 between March 1st and March 17th alone. No Amber Alert for any of them.
Okay. Charles.
Loser Devin Nunes, chairman of the House Intel Committee. He had what seemed to be important news, but he released it in a very indistinct way without actually explaining what was in it, and he did it in the wrong sequence by going to the White House and the press before he told his colleagues on the Intel Committee. The winner, Barack Obama. His Obamacare doesn't have long to live, but he planted the seed of the idea of universal health care. He originally always wanted a single-payer system. He said he wanted it, but he wasn't able to get it. I think his legacy will be within 10 years, We're going to have that, and that'll be because of the expectations he created with Obamacare.
Down the road, do they get a tax reform deal before the end of the year?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
I have to say yes because it's too sad to think otherwise.
Wow, okay, that's optimistic. Well, before we go, I'd like to say my winner was a special report because we've never had a panelist use the shrug emoji. It's very millennial, and there it is on the bottom. Guy Benson with the shrug emoji. That is a winner for this week. Thank you all, panel.